When I was young, there was a lot of worry about the development of the military-industrial complex, which is going to take over the country, et cetera. That didn't happen. What's happened is that we've been taken over by the medical-industrial complex.
Hello and welcome back to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I can't tell you how excited I am to introduce you to Robin Cook. Now, before I do, I want to share something that's very personal and something that I'm really excited about. Now, over the years hosting this show, I've had the privilege of speaking with hundreds of authors, from first-time writers to icons like today's guest, Dr. Robin Cook. And one thing I've learned is that every compelling book begins long before a single word hits the page. It begins with the stories we carry, the ones we're sometimes afraid to tell, and the ones that ultimately shape who we become. That's why I'm launching a new 12-week mentorship program for aspiring memoirists. It's a space where we'll, help writers uncork their stories and cork their stories' true potential. We'll start with excavation, moving from writing from a wound to writing from the scar. And then we'll build momentum by architecting the spine of your story and ultimately bring it all together into a clear, confident roadmap. Now, if you've ever felt the pull to write your own story, this might be the nudge you've been waiting for. And I'm excited to work with you. You can learn more just by going to the show notes of this episode. You'll see a link right there. Now, speaking of storytellers who know how to craft a narrative with precision, tension, and heart, today I had the honor of welcoming back Dr. Robin Cook. His new book, Spasm, continues his legacy of blending cutting-edge medical insight with page-turning suspense. And we get into all of it, including how he balances standalone novels with serious work and what it's like seeing his stories adapted for the screen. So please settle in, check your gallbladders, because this is going to be a good one. Robin Cook is an American physician and novelist who regularly writes about medicine and topics affecting public health. He's best known for combining medical writing with the thriller genre, and many of his books have been bestsellers on the New York Times bestseller list. His books have sold nearly 400 million copies. Now, that's a number. He joins me today on Uncorking a Story to talk about his career and latest novel, Spasm. Welcome back to Uncorking a Story, Robin.
Well, it's nice to be here.
It's nice to have you here. And I have to say, over 42 books right now. I just want to know, what keeps you writing?
Well, it's I'm the only person in the United States who benefits from the fact that we have the screwiest healthcare system in the industrialized world. Because I'm not going to run out of subject matter. Just almost picking up the newspaper or even experiencing medical care today myself, which unfortunately I did have an opportunity not too long ago to experience. And so that's the problem. And ironically, it's probably the reason that I started writing in the first place, because I had this mistaken idea that by using entertainment, I could get people to understand medical issues and thereby change health policy. But it hasn't happened.
Didn't work out that way.
It didn't work out that way. I mean, people are very interested in medical issues, but somehow it doesn't seem to get translated, or at least their representatives in Congress don't listen. And I kind of understand that, too, is because the various aspects of the medical industry spend an enormous amount of money on lobbying.
Yeah.
And so that can't but be such an influence on anyone who is a member of the House of Representatives or a senator to get this lobbying all the time and so active. The pharmaceutical industry alone, as I understand it, spends almost $1 million a day in lobbying.
That's a figure that doesn't surprise me. They've got a very big vested interest in all this. I mean, money talks. But it's medicine and the medical community. It is something that we're fascinated about just as regular consumers. I mean, just look at over the years how many shows have been set in hospitals. You know, we're talking from soap operas. You know, from my days watching with my grandmother, I think Young and the Restless, to where I remember Dr. John Dixon. He was a scoundrel. But you know, to primetime dramas. I mean, medicine is everywhere.
Well, it influenced my life. I remember on Thursday nights watching Dr. Ben Casey, and it probably contributed to my wanting to become a doctor. But of course, shows back then were only showing the kind of rosy side of medicine. And so I try also to show some of the negative sides. And you know, my first book, I thought people were going to be fascinated by it. No one cared. No one liked it. No one read it. And that was almost it for me in writing until I became encouraged to do another one and try to do it in a way that would recognize that there are certain types of stories that people like to or were interested in reading. And you know, we're all more similar than we are different. And so I was sort of the same way. I kind of liked my first book because I wrote it. But would I have picked that book up to read, you know, if I hadn't written it? That was the big question. And so my idea, all right, I'll write another one. And this time I'll try to write a book that is going to be really fun to read and get people maybe to think a little bit, but to try to compete with other things that are vying for their attention. And the result of that was my second book, Coma.
Well, you know, they say that failure is a wonderful teacher if you are willing to learn the lessons from it. And I hate to use the word failure for you, because clearly you're anything but that lesson of sort of not meeting your own expectations from that first book. How did you build the motivation to you know, get back on the horse, to use a cliched expression, and take a stab at writing number two?
It was a combination. I had decided to go back and start another surgical residency because I did general surgery first. And then I decided, well, I don't want to take out gallbladders for the rest of my life. And I really kind of saw the light. And I said, you know what's a really good specialty is ophthalmology, eye surgery. Because you get to do surgery if you like surgery. And I like surgery because you're presented with a problem, you solve it. It gives you this great feeling of accomplishment that you can take credit for. And so I went back and started anew. And, you know, the first year of residency, particularly in surgery or any surgical subspecialties, is really kind of, you're hazed. You're really, you're treated badly. It's just the way the process works. And I remember getting sort of treated badly. And my first book came out just before I went back to do a surgical the residency, and I got a little teased by some of the professors that I wrote this book complaining about being a surgical resident, etc. And being teased like that made me think, you know, I'm going to write another one and see if I can make them eat their words. And I teased them at that point, too, because I was an ophthalmology or an eye surgical resident, and I said that I was going to write a book and call it the Retina Ripoff. You know, retinas detach. And and that got a lot of laughs. And so that actually was, to a certain degree, what actually happened. I thought, well, you know, maybe I should try it again. And luckily, being an eye resident is a lot easier than being a general surgical resident. And in fact, in comparison for me, I felt like it was essentially almost like being on vacation. Surgical resident, the first year, you're on every other night. You're usually up all night, every other night, and you're harassed during the day and whatnot. Whereas being an ophthalmology resident was very elegant in comparison. So I had an opportunity to work on my second book at night while I was a resident.
Yeah. And then did you do anything to sort of, teach yourself, how to be a better writer over that course of time?
Yes. And what I did is I read a lot of books that people had voted that they liked by these books being on the bestseller list. And so I knew which books people liked. And so I have to say that I had not read a lot of fiction up until then. And suddenly I read a lot of fiction. And I realized why people like certain books, because I like them too. And then you kind of see, well, at least I was able to see that back then, when there were more male readers than there are today, thrillers was a very popular genre. And so I read a bunch of thrillers and realized that I could adapt that concept to medicine. So I essentially created the medical thriller.
Yeah. And you got two things that people love. They love medicine and sort of kind of being around that and perhaps learning about it and the drama that's there, mixing it with thriller. You were a sort of a category captain, if you will. I mean, you're sort of a pioneer, I guess.
In a way I was. In a way I was sort of following a little bit in the footsteps of Michael Crichton. He had written a book that had come out and was very popular called The Andromeda Strain. It's not really a medical thriller, it's more science fiction. But it had some very interesting medical issues, at least medical science, that he was very cleverly worked into his story. And I guess that was one of the books that I found that I enjoyed as much as other people. And I thought, well, why not have a story that has medical issues that is not science fiction? Because there's so many things going on in medicine, of late even, that it almost seems like science fiction. When I was growing up, it's the discovery of DNA and genetics and recombinant biology. I kind of lived through all these exciting times, and to be able to take advantage of that and put it into stories that the general public can read and understand. So it worked out well in that sense, because it also made me, once you go through medical school and then you get out and you're practicing medicine, a lot of times you don't get to really understand what the science is advancing in other areas of medicine than what you're doing yourself. Whereas I really had to keep up on stuff so I could keep it in my books.
Yeah, and then translate it in a way that made it sort of approachable for an average reader.
Exactly. Like a good example would be a book of mine that I particularly liked was called Chromosome 6. And what that really was a book talking about the fact of using genetics to change the genetic makeup of an animal so that could be used, the organs of the animal could be used as a transplant organ, and have less opportunity to cause a rejection in the human. So it was a matter of putting human genes into animals, particularly genes associated with markers and genetic markers, etc. So I wanted to write a novel about it, how fascinating this was, but that, well, perhaps it can go wrong. Maybe what would happen if you put too many human genes into an animal? And in chromosome 6, the animal I used was a bonobo, which is a type of chimpanzee, which is already pretty close to human genome, is fairly close. I mean, it's only about 1 to 2% different. And if you start putting human genes in there, what happens in chromosome 6 is that they put so many human genes in that they don't realize it, but they create a race of proto-humans.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway.
Which I feel like we might be doing with artificial intelligence right now.
Well, combining that with the ability of altering genes, it's you don't have to be a rocket scientist, so to speak, to think of some disturbing possibilities.
Yeah. Well, I want to jump in and talk about Spasm. I know that that is your latest, and it brings back two of my favorite characters, Jack Stapleton Dr. Jack Stapleton and Laurie Montgomery. What can you share with us about Spasm?
Well, I wanted to take my characters out of New York because they've been in New York, for 14 or 15 books, and I wanted to take them out of the city and take them to someplace a little bit different. And I thought I could create a very interesting environment to a place where I had the opportunity to go when I was like a young teenager, and that is the Adirondacks. And I had in mind what I wanted to do really was to write a book about something really new and exciting in terms of medical science. And that is the concept of a protein that can be infectious in a bad way. And these are called prions. And it turns out that very few people knew anything about prions. And in fact, I didn't know very much myself, except that I knew that they caused all the neurodegenerative diseases, or at least that's what's hypothesized, is that Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and ALS, et cetera, are all caused by prions. And a prion is an infectious protein. So I thought, well, all right, this is a good challenge. Can I write a fun story using my characters such that the reader will not realize that they're learning about some very new medical information? And that is understand the concept of infectious proteins or a prion.
So, what I'm curious about is you come up with this idea. Now, this wouldn't have to be a book in a series. I mean, this doesn't have to be a Jack Stapleton and Laurie Montgomery book. How do you determine that this story is right for those characters versus it being a standalone novel?
I have to admit that in some respects, it's self-serving, because I like to write about Jack Stapleton in particular, because he's kind of an alter ego of mine. In that his response to a lot of things are very similar to my response before I became a writer.
Interesting. Like, how is he an alter ego? I mean, you look like you ride bikes, and I know Jack does, through New York City, albeit,
Well, he also plays street basketball. Unfortunately, or I don't know, maybe it's fortunate, I had to stop playing street basketball. That was what I really enjoyed doing. and I played street basketball for 45 years. And I eventually, I snapped both anterior cruciate ligaments, had to have those repaired. Ultimately, I had to have double knee replacements. Now, I could probably go back and play now, but I choose not to because I don't want to go through that again. So I still get to play basketball, but only through Jack Stapleton. And to me, that was the most fun sport that I continued after high school and college. So, and I still dream about it. I still dream about playing basketball, and I'm much better in my dreams than I was in reality.
Yeah, I have a twin brother. He was a basketball. He's about 3 inches taller than me, and he was very good at basketball. I was not. I was more of a baseball guy. But basketball certainly wasn't my thing. I didn't have the height for it, and I didn't have the coordination either. I trip over myself like you wouldn't believe.
Well, I enjoyed it. I played a lot. We had a very active league in Boston in the Harvard system. That we in the medical we had a team. They had a team at the business school, Harvard Business School, and a team at the Harvard Law School. And during my reign, we just annihilated, particularly the law school, because all they wanted to do was argue anyway. And the business school, however, they had the best gym. So, and in fact, it was the business school that really, I have to give them credit for part credit for keeping me as a writer. Because I did ask some of the young professors that I played basketball with if they had any suggestions. And they told me that they wanted to let me know that they taught by the case method. And they suggested, why don't you study a couple of successful books, particularly, and then try to imitate how it happened. And I actually did that. I chose two books that I studied, and the whole process, the whole project of these books, because both of them were unknown authors who suddenly had books that did extremely well, and kind of studied the way that these projects had happened, and then tried to reproduce it with my second book, Coma.
Yeah. Yeah, just getting back to Jack for a second, because I know he's a character you enjoy writing. You've written him for, I don't know, over 20 years now. I can't remember. The first book he was in, was it Contagion?
It was.
Yeah. I remember loving that book. But that was, well over 20 years ago. Do you still learn new things about characters you conceived of, decades ago?
In a way, and Spasm is a good example of that, because prior to Spasm, Jack generally makes very clever decisions, and you kind of are following a little bit behind Jack and what he's doing. And whereas in Spasm, Jack starts doing things that you say to yourself, you shouldn't do that. And don't go there. And Jack, wake up. So it's a little bit different in that regard. And I think it makes it kind of fun. And I think a lot of the people who have followed my books will feel the same way. They'll recognize that Jack in this book is not quite as smart as he normally is, and which makes him seem a little bit more real, I think.
Interesting. So in some regards, the reader might have a little bit more information than your chief protagonist.
Yes, very definitely. And Spasm is that way because right in the beginning, you know what's killed. Well, you don't know right away what's killed this individual, who then Jack wants to try to figure out what killed him. But you learn fairly quickly. And in the second chapter, you learn why. So you know all this before Jack even arrives on the scene. And so it's a story that's constructed quite differently than usual, my usual stories.
It reminds me of Columbo, and that's how, you know, when the writers of Columbo were put together, like we as the audience knew within the first 5 to 10 minutes, certainly before the first commercial break, who killed who. We may not know why, and that's why we need Columbo to come in, right? But we know before Columbo knows, although he figures it out pretty quickly. If he ever asks you 3 questions in a row, you're done for.
That's very good. I forgot about that. Yes, that's one of the reasons that I think that Columbo was very popular back when it was.
It's funny. I watch. It's on all the time. And my wife is like, "Are you watching that again?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "You've seen all 69 episodes." I said, "I know, but this is the one with the chef, and it's so good."
Yeah.
You know, there's some things that are worth watching and rereading. Reading more than once as well. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was, you know, as a writer, your work has been, you know, translated to the screen. I mean, even starting with Coma. I mean, that was, I believe, a film with Michael Douglas, if I'm not
exactly. Yes.
How do you know, how does it feel sort of seeing your work interpreted by actors and directors, other creative people aside from yourself? I mean, there's the intent, you know, what you wrote on the page, and then what comes to life on the screen oftentimes are different. How does that make you feel as the writer?
It goes the entire gamut of feelings. I mean, if the movie comes out and it's close to my vision, I think it's great. If it's completely different, I think it's terrible. And that actually has been my experience with the movies, because Coma was my first really successful book, and we made a movie with, as you say, it was Michael Douglas's first movie, and I made it with Michael Crichton, who I knew a little bit and who had been to medical school, and I thought this is going to work out really well because he's not going to distort the medical aspects of it. Coma was not a horror story. It's a medical story with horrific elements. And then my next book, which I also loved, was called Sphinx, and it was about archaeology. I could see that. I could see it as really a very popular movie and everything. It was bought by a movie company, and it was assigned, or they hired a really very well-known director, Michael Schaffner. What was his first name? Can't think of his first name. Schaffner. He had done Patent, the movie Patent. He had done the original Planet of the Apes. So I thought, this is going to be perfect. Well, the first thing he did as director was fire me as the screenwriter and hire his own screenwriter that he had worked with in the past. And they proceeded to completely change my story from a woman who, this story of Sphinx predated Raiders of the Lost Ark. But it was the woman was an archaeologist, sort of like in the Raiders of the Lost Ark. A little tongue-in-cheek, kind of fun. But she treated men like James Bond treated women. I turned tables on it. And it made it really a fun story and whatnot. whereas they changed it into a 30s love story that was boring. And so within just 2 movies, I had experienced a very good experience and a very bad experience. So that's the way it is. And unfortunately, the movie industry, it's not easy to deal with. And I'm luckily at this stage, I can be a little bit more demanding. And 2 of my books now are in pre-production, in which I'm playing more of a role to make sure that the movies reflect the novel in the way that the novel was successful. So why change things? I mean, I know there's a lot of things that you have to do differently when you're presenting things visually rather than describing them with words. And but nonetheless, that the concept, like one of the books that were in pre-production is my book last year was called Bellevue, and it has a supernatural element, but again, it could be very much distorted into a horror story. It's not a horror story. It's about medicine, really, and how medicine progressed and how some doctors were terrible and thought of themselves and not their patients, and which is what that Bellevue tries to reflect. That the history of medicine is certainly it's not an upward slant of knowledge. It was sort of sawtooth, and a lot of people really suffered who happened to be patients in the past.
Well, as long as you bring up that novel, I did love that book. And I know that's what we talked about last year. And of course, I'm sure there's a few people listening who haven't listened. So, we won't spoil anything. But it for me was very different than a lot of the stuff that you've written in the past. I mean, it's of course still has a medical component to it, but it certainly evolves a lot differently, and it ended for me in a more surprising way.
Very surprised.
I had to sit with it. I had to sit with that ending for a bit, and then only to realize, well, that's the only way that it could have ended. But would you say that that's also about hubris as well? Is there an element of that in the protagonist in Bellevue?
Well, you just don't realize how sane he is. In the beginning, you're in his mind and you think he's perfectly sane. And ultimately, you wonder if he's seen what he's seen or he's conjuring what he's seen. And it's such a stressful, as we talked a little bit about, being a first-year surgical resident. It's such a stressful time, and it's. I think it's probably just as stressful now as it was when I had to experience being the first-year surgical resident. You just, you feel like you're thrown into the deep end of the pool and you just barely know how to swim. And the stresses, and by using that technique, I was able to bring up the history of medicine because of his previous forebearers had been surgeons and recognized supposedly as being very great surgeons, etc. But then you learn that maybe they didn't really do the right thing.
Right.
I think it'll make a very good movie if that's how it's done. Again, it's not supposed to be a horror movie. So hopefully that's how it's going to be presented.
Yeah. I could see the temptation, though, to turn it into one. just given the setting. And I think you even mentioned, this Bellevue Hospital in Manhattan is a big haunted house in the middle of.
And it's still there. It's still there today.
Not far from where Dr. Laurie Montgomery and Jack Stapleton work, right?
Across the street. It's across the street. The huge 800-bed hospital has been empty for 45 years.
Yeah.
Well, there's a little, the homeless shelter at one end, just a small a wing of the hospital, just a couple of floors. Otherwise, the whole thing is empty. And it has to be haunted. Otherwise, it wouldn't still be there.
That's right. That's right. You're just thinking of your career, your 42 books, impressive 400 million books sold, tremendous amount of success. What's a piece of advice you'd offer anybody looking to build longevity in their own writing career?
I feel like I was extraordinarily lucky. And so a lot of people will ask me some sort of question like that, and I wondering if they should write a book, and they say they have this idea, and what I usually tell people, and what I think of myself, is that I was very, very lucky. But I tell people that writing a book can be really an experience, and you can learn a lot about yourself. And if that is adequate, even if no one buys it, or nowadays you can self-publish. You couldn't when I first got involved. Well, you could, but you really couldn't. Today, you actually can. And there are some very successful writers who self-publish to begin with. So it's possible. But the process of writing a book has to, at least your initial book, has to be somehow a bit autobiographical. And if that's going to be enough, then I encourage people to do it. But if you're writing with the idea of thinking this is a way I'm going to become successful or whatever, it's so difficult, and just writing a fabulous book isn't necessarily going to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much more that goes into it. The story, the talent is one part. Yep. There's a fair amount of luck. And then in today's environment, there's so much competition. You're not competing with, 10 other new releases that week. I mean, we're talking millions. I mean, I don't know how many millions of books are published a year through the rise of independent publishing and even hybrid publishing, but there's a lot more competition out there, and those advances are not so big for first-time authors.
They're almost non-existent.
Yeah, you're not going to be living off of that. So don't get into a writing career if you want to make a ton of dough.
Right.
I mean, that may come later on, but and certainly if you don't want to make a ton of dough, you could become a podcaster who talks to writers because.
Right. Well, I still would have written my first book even if I didn't write another one, or my second book wasn't successful and I realized I was going to have to put my efforts into something else, because it organized my thoughts in a way about an experience. I think most people's first book has to be, I guess, somehow a little bit autobiographical.
Yeah. I mean, even in fiction, you're putting a lot of yourself on the page, whether you know it or not. You're putting yourself there. I want to sort of close with this one. I know in our first conversation, I remember you said that you feel lucky every day that you get to write. And, I'm curious, as you're looking ahead, is there a story you're still chasing? Is there something that, you want to write but haven't written yet?
Well, in a certain sense, I feel that way with each one of my projects. One of the issues, the current issues that people have heard about, and I've heard about it, and really bothers me, is the fact, or at least the one of the recurrent themes in all of my books is the unfortunate marriage between medicine and business, and which is just getting worse. And which I feel like medicine really got off on the wrong foot. And when I was young, there was a lot of worry about the development of the military-industrial complex, which is going to take over the country, et cetera. That didn't happen. What's happened is that we've been taken over by the medical-industrial complex. And so it's issues like that really affect me, and I keep reading about them. And the one that I'm talking about now, that I'm trying to figure out how to write a novel that'll get people to understand, is the fact that there are these private equity groups that like to buy hospitals and force them into bankruptcy. And I just didn't have any idea why or how that happened. So I've researched it. Now I understand. And so can I write a novel that people will enjoy about this process? So that's my current effort, is to come up with a novel. I've essentially pretty much finished the outlining. And maybe we can do this again next year. And that novel is going to be called Bleed.
Bleed.
I wanted to call it Hemorrhage, but there's hardly any way to get that long word on to a title of a book.
Yeah.
So, and it's in, most people will say, oh, it has to be something about bleeding or hemorrhaging. Well, it's using it in terms of hemorrhaging cash.
Yeah.
And so these hospitals hemorrhage cash to the benefit of the private equity group. And they don't care. You know, it goes bankrupt or whatever, and the community is denied health care. And they think, well, yeah, let them drive an hour to another town or something like that. So that's what I'm trying to do now.
Well, that sounds good. I look forward to talking about Bleed with you next year. And I have to say, Dr. Cook, thank you for coming back on Uncorking a Story and letting me re-uncork yours.
Well, it's nice to be here. And I hope, as someone who reads as much as you do, I hope you enjoyed Spasm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As I said, I do love me some Jack Stapleton and Laurie Montgomery. So very good. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.